As I stared out the window of my new high-rise apartment, my thoughts raced back to Robert. Just a week ago, I was still living with him, our relationship strained beyond repair. The tension had been building for years, but it was Robert's final act of betrayal that sealed my decision to leave. I could still remember his voice, indifferent and cold, as he told me about the luggage he had received from his parents and sister. It wasn't just about luggage, though. They were being evicted from their apartment, and Robert had volunteered my home, for them to move into without even asking me. My stomach knotted at the thought of living with his family. I knew what that meant. More demands, more disrespect, and more of being treated like a servant. I couldn't do it anymore. The moment Robert said, "They'll be staying with us for a while," I knew something inside me had changed. For years, I had allowed myself to be walked over, hoping things would get better. Robert had promised me stability, love, and partnership when we got married. But instead, I had been stuck supporting him while he barely lifted a finger. And his family, oh, they were the worst. His sister, always asking for money or a favor, and his mother, treating me like I was less than dirt, had worn me down. Yet, I had stayed. I stayed because I loved Robert. Or at least, I thought I did. But that love was long gone, replaced by resentment and exhaustion. I had done my best to ignore the mistreatment, brushing off the insults and disrespect. But Robert's recent decision to bring his family into our home, expecting me to cater to their every need, was the final straw. I couldn't believe he didn't even discuss it with me. It was as if my opinion didn't matter. He made me feel invisible. Even worse, he treated my contributions, financial and emotional, as if they were owed to him. All I was to him now was a wallet and a free housekeeper. My heart raced as I replayed the moment I knew I had to leave. He hadn't even looked up from his phone when I confronted him. That was it. I had made up my mind. I hadn't told Robert right away. Instead, I started to plan my escape. I contacted a lawyer the next day, quietly gathering everything I needed for the divorce. I wasn't going to let him, or his family, dictate my life any longer. Luckily, I had a secret weapon. The high-rise apartment I had bought as an investment. Robert didn't even know about it. For years, I had worked hard at my job, saving enough to buy the apartment for rental income. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. And now it was going to be my sanctuary. I had it rented out until recently, but when the tenant moved out, I saw my opportunity to make it my new home. On the day I left, I made sure everything was perfect. I packed my things carefully, making sure not to leave anything behind that could be used against me. I wasn't just walking out on Robert. I was walking away from his family's never-ending demands and the life of servitude I had been living. With one last look around the house, I called a moving company. It felt surreal as I watched them load the boxes into the truck. This house, once filled with the hopes of a happy marriage, had become nothing more than a cage. I wasn't sad to leave. In fact, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief as I drove away. Robert didn't realize I was gone until late that evening. I hadn't answered his calls or texts, and by then I had already moved into my new place. The first call came through just as I was unpacking the last of my boxes. "Where are you?" he asked, sounding confused. "What's going on?" I smiled to myself, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. "I've moved out," I said simply. The silence on the other end was delicious. For a moment, Robert didn't know how to respond. "What do you mean you've moved out? What about my parents and sister? They're moving in." His voice rose, but I didn't flinch. "That's your problem now," I replied calmly, hanging up the phone. The days that followed were tense. Robert tried to contact me repeatedly, but I ignored his calls. I wasn't interested in hearing more excuses or empty promises. The truth was, I had already mentally checked out of the marriage long before I physically left. Still, it wasn't long before Robert started getting desperate. One morning, my phone buzzed with a message from him. "We need to talk. My family is freaking out and I need your help." I shook my head in disbelief. Even now, he couldn't take responsibility for his own mess. His parents and sister had been living off him, and me, for years. And now that I was gone, they were panicking. I knew what was coming next. Robert would beg me to come back, to support him and his family financially. just like I always had. But this time, I was prepared. My lawyer had already filed the divorce papers, and I was ready to move on with my life. Robert's next call came that afternoon. "Listen," he started, his voice low and strained. "I can't do this without you. My parents have nowhere to go. My sister, she's devastated. You can't just leave us like this." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered all the times he had left me to fend for myself while he pursued his own selfish interests. I stayed firm. "I'm not coming back, Robert. This is your responsibility now." What Robert didn't know was that I had already spoken to Max, our son. Max had always been close to me, but I had kept him out of the drama between me and Robert as much as possible. But when I told him about the divorce, he was furious at Robert. "He's always taken you for granted, Mom," Max had said angrily. "You deserve better than this." Hearing those words from my son had given me the final push I needed. I wasn't alone in this. Max had even offered to help me move into the high-rise apartment. And now, with Robert's family breathing down his neck, I knew they were all about to crumble under the weight of their own choices. Robert's desperation grew by the day. He tried to guilt me, saying things like, "What about Max? He'll hate you for breaking up the family." But I knew better. Max had already taken my side, and there was nothing Robert could do to change that. Meanwhile, Robert's family started turning on him. Without my financial support, they couldn't afford to live in the rental apartment. His sister, who spent all her money on concert tickets and idle merchandise, was suddenly facing the reality that there was no one left to bail her out. His parents, living off their modest pension, had no idea how to make ends meet. The final blow came when Robert called me one last time. "You need to help us," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "We're going to lose everything. I've taken out loans, but the interest is piling up. I can't even afford the rent on our place." He paused, waiting for me to offer a solution, but there was nothing left to say. "I've already made my decision, Robert," I replied, my voice steady. "You'll have to figure this out on your own." The silence that followed was heavy. I could feel the weight of his realization, the moment he understood that I wasn't coming back, and neither was the life he had taken for granted. Since then, I've moved on. The divorce was finalized after a bitter fight, but I didn't mind. I had already won my freedom. Robert and his family's pleas for help became more desperate as the weeks passed, but I stayed firm. Max and I have grown closer since the split, and he recently told me he has a girlfriend he wants me to meet. The thought of our family growing makes me happier than I've been in years. I sit in my high-rise apartment, overlooking the city, feeling nothing but peace. The dark chapter of my life with Robert is finally over, and now I can look forward to a future that's mine, and mine